Tensions soar in the U.S.-China trade war as President Trump claims active talks with Xi Jinping, hinting at a breakthrough. But Beijing denies any negotiations, calling it fake news. With China's economy reeling from deflation, low consumer confidence, and canceled export orders, reports of secret tariff exemptions suggest Xi may be making concessions behind closed doors. Is China bending under pressure, or is Trump's optimism misplaced? Dive into the high-stakes drama unfolding now. On April 25th, in an article published by Time magazine titled Exclusive, Inside Trump's First 100 Days, President Donald Trump claimed that Chinese President Xi Jinping called him regarding trade issues, suggesting active engagement. He stated, "He's called, and I don't think that's a sign of weakness on his behalf," and asserted that his team was in talks with China on a trade deal. However, Beijing denied the U.S. description of active negotiations. Chinese officials, including Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun, called reports of such discussions fake news. As far as I know, there's been no recent call between the leaders of the two countries. I would like to reiterate that China and the U.S. have not engaged in consultations or negotiations on tariff issues. When President Trump was asked by White House reporters about the last time he spoke with Xi Jinping, he did not specify when the call took place and avoided further details when pressed.
I don't want to comment on that, but I've spoken to him many times.
Interestingly, Gordon G. Chang, a well-known U.S. expert on China, a board member of the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, and a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, recently wrote that on the morning of April 24th, around a dozen Chinese officials, including a senior Chinese finance ministry official, entered the main building of the U.S. Treasury Department in Washington. Chinese security officials reportedly attempted to prevent photographers from documenting their entry. Chang also cited a letter from reality check trade expert Alan Tonelson to the Gatestone Institute on April 25, 2025, stating, "In fact, tariff exemptions not only highlight that Beijing's need for access to the U.S. market far exceeds America's need for the Chinese market, but also that critical products made in the U.S. are simply not manufactured in China and will not be in the coming years." On April 25th, Reuters and the Financial Times reported that China has not imposed a uniform 125% tariff on U.S. goods. In short, certain U.S. imported products are effectively exempt from tariffs. Beijing's new policy has not been officially announced and remains unofficial. The Financial Times noted, companies and industries such as aviation and industrial chemicals report that some of their products have been granted temporary tariff relief, while local media reported that certain semiconductor products have been exempted from tariffs. Michael Hart, president of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, told Reuters that some of the chamber's pharmaceutical company members indicated they can now import products tariff-free. China has also exempted aircraft engines, nacelles, landing gear, and their components from tariffs. According to sources, a working group from China's Ministry of Commerce is compiling a list of products potentially eligible for tariff exemptions and has asked companies to submit applications. A list of 131 product categories reportedly under consideration for tariff exemptions circulated on Friday on Chinese social media platforms and among some businesses and trade groups. Hart does not believe the tariff exemptions are the result of a specific policy. He told the Financial Times, "I think it's more of a one-off at the moment." Chinese customs officials and Ministry of Commerce personnel have not yet responded to requests for comment. Reuters stated, China has not publicly announced any exemptions. Huatai Securities estimated that Beijing did not impose tariffs on $45 billion worth of goods imported into China last year. These exemptions indicate a trend. Trade expert Alan Tonelson told the Gatestone Institute, recent reports that China has quietly exempted certain U.S. imports, including some semiconductors, industrial chemicals, and medical devices, from tariffs clearly show that China is making concessions in its trade conflict with Trump. China's Consumer Price Index, CPI, in March fell year-on-year for the second consecutive month, while the Producer Price Index, PPI, saw an expanded year-on-year decline, marking the weakest performance in 4 months. According to the latest macroeconomic data released by China's National Bureau of Statistics on April 10th, the CPI in March fell 0.1% year-on-year, a smaller decline than February's 0.7%, but below the flat growth predicted by Bloomberg and Reuters. On the industrial production side, the PPI's decline reflects deflation persisting for 30 months, with the year-on-year drop widening from 2.2% in February to 2.5% in March. The month-on-month decline also expanded from 0.1% in February to 0.4% in March. This suggests that the Chinese economy is likely contracting rapidly. More importantly, the Consumer Confidence Index, CCI, an economic indicator, measures consumers' confidence in the current economic situation and future economic prospects. When the CCI falls below 90, it typically indicates significantly low consumer confidence, reflecting pessimistic sentiments about the economic outlook. The chart above is data released by China's National Bureau of Statistics, where the red curve represents the CCI. The current CCI is even lower than during the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020 and 2021, at just under 90. This implies worsening economic expectations. Consumers are skeptical about future income, employment, and economic growth, potentially anticipating an economic slowdown or even recession. This sentiment is tied to China's real estate crisis, rising unemployment, and the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. Declining consumption, willingness. A CCI below 90 indicates that consumers are inclined to reduce spending, particularly on durable goods, cars, appliances, or large investments, e.g., home purchases. This could exacerbate deflationary pressures, as evidenced by the continuous CPI decline in March 2025. Heightened deflation risk. Low confidence leads to reduced consumption, lowering demand for goods and services and further depressing prices, creating a deflationary spiral. Combined with the PPI's 30-month decline, 2.5%, a CCI below 90 reinforces this trend. Slowing economic activity, low consumer confidence suppresses activity in sectors like retail, real estate, and manufacturing, dragging down GDP growth. China's official 5% growth target for 2025 is likely unattainable. Let's first listen to the authentic voices from ordinary people across China.
我办工厂已经有13个年头了。
I've been running a factory for 13 years, and this is the most confusing time I've ever experienced. It's the first time in 13 years that I've felt so lost. Why? Because after the Trump administration increased tariffs, many of our orders were canceled. I have over 100 workers and I really don't know what to do. To be honest, we produce small appliances, things like razors, hair clippers, flashlights, electric toothbrushes, that sort of thing. Many of our orders are for exports, and after Trump raised tariffs, a lot of them were canceled. We've already prepared some materials, assembled some products, and some are waiting to be shipped, while others are still on the production line. I'm in a tough spot now, can't stop, but if I keep going, I don't know if we'll be able to sell them. This is the most confusing and helpless moment I've faced in 13 years of running a factory.
决定了。
I've decided to quit. I'm selling the equipment, closing the factory, and never touching manufacturing again. When exports to the U.S. are forced to halt, a large volume of export products can only be sold domestically, intensifying price wars in China's domestic market.
一件衣服正常卖100，我们拿货价。
A piece of clothing normally sells for 100 yuan, but our wholesale price is just 5 yuan for a heavy coat like a down jacket. You have to understand, the harder it is to sell something now, the better it actually sells. But if your product is something you can easily find on Pinduoduo or Taobao, basically, in the next 2 or 3 years, your direction, your company, your industry will only get worse.
关税大战，外贸尾货有多惨？
How bad is the situation for export leftovers? A piece of clothing here could sell for 100 yuan, but look now, it's being sold by the ton, averaging just a few cents per piece, and no one's even picking it up. This is a 20,000 square meter export warehouse in Jiaxing. Affected by tariffs, export goods have become leftovers. Jiang Shaoquan knives are being sold by the ton, averaging just a few cents each. Export flip-flops are a few cents. They're still sorting them. All sorts of clothes piled up haven't even been sorted yet. How are they sold? By the ton, averaging a few cents per piece.
京东不是给了2000亿的一个补贴。
JD.com offered a 200 billion yuan subsidy to encourage exports to shift to domestic sales, so I thought I'd check out this domestic sales expo in Shanghai for opportunities. My goodness. After coming to the site and especially seeing the domestic products from competitors, I decided not to wade into the murky waters of domestic sales. After attending the domestic sales expo, you realize how great the export environment was.
我37岁了，未婚未育。
I'm 37, unmarried, childless, no house, no car, no savings, and today my boss told me the company is going bankrupt.
现在的老百姓呢？
Ordinary people nowadays are really struggling to survive. There's no happiness to speak of. A CCI consistently below 90 indicates extreme pessimism about economic prospects, weakening consumption willingness, potentially exacerbating deflation and economic slowdown. In China, a CCI below 90 may be particularly severe as the economy heavily relies on consumption-driven domestic demand. In March 2025, the real estate slump, export restrictions, and employment pressures may further depress the CCI, reflecting consumer concerns about deflation and economic uncertainty. Combined with February 2025's PMI of 49.1, indicating manufacturing contraction, this could further erode consumer spending confidence. Some researchers argue that China's deflation is structural and could persist for many years, similar to Japan's lost 30 years. In March this year, retail sales in Beijing and Shanghai, China's most prosperous cities, fell 9.9% and 14.1% respectively, despite consumption voucher stimulus, showing continued weakness. While the Chinese government claims to be intensifying direct consumption stimulus policies, such as tax cuts or cash subsidies, the results have been minimal. Unfortunately, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party's political system are structured to accept only the most hostile policies. Worse, Xi has tied the CCP's legitimacy to his claim of the East rising, the West declining, that China has surpassed the U.S. This makes it difficult for him to make any moves suggesting reliance on U.S. trade or to respond rationally and sensibly to pressure from the U.S. Beijing's counterproductive stance clearly reflects the limitations of this authoritarian regime. President Trump stated last week that his administration has been negotiating tariffs with China. In response to these conciliatory remarks, the Chinese government issued a series of statements denying any such negotiations, effectively boxing itself into a corner with little room to maneuver. Meanwhile, China is grappling with an impending debt crisis, and Xi has deprioritized consumption as the foundation of the Chinese economy. Therefore, China must rely on increasing exports to salvage the increasingly dire domestic situation, or, more passively, revert to a Mao-era policy of closing the country and tightening belts. Take aircraft components as an example. Beijing has ordered its airlines not to accept Boeing aircraft, and the plane manufacturer has already transported 3 737 MAX planes intended for delivery back to the U.S. from China. Given that both Boeing and Airbus have long order backlogs, this punishment will cause Boeing virtually no loss. However, if Trump orders Boeing to withhold components or services from Chinese airlines, China would soon be forced to ground a large number of passenger planes. In fact, China lacks the capacity and will to wage a protracted trade war with a determined Trump administration. This is one of the greatest weaknesses exposed when Beijing quietly makes concessions. Communist China is making significant trade concessions but clearly will not admit it publicly. Do you think Xi Jinping will yield? Or is this just wishful thinking on Trump's part? Feel free to leave your comments and share your opinions and suggestions. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.